Often people will say, the Bible is full of translations and the translations are no good and you're really following bull because you can't really trust anything the Bible says. It's only as good as the translator. Well, let's take a look at that for a second. The Old Testament and the Jewish history. The original Torah is a perfect example of how the Old Testament was maintained. Back in the day, if you were going to be a priest, a Jewish priest at that time, and I'm not talking the same Jews that are in power right now, the Khazars that were brought into power in the 1950s. My understanding is the true Jews of history is a different bloodline altogether from the Khazars that are there now. So going back to the original Jewish history, the original Jewish faith, if you're becoming a priest, you'd have to write the Bible from memory. The original Bible was written with no punctuation, no spaces. It was just consonant, 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 consonant. So Yahweh, for example, as we say, was spelt differently, and I'll put that picture up if I have not already. And if you're studying to be a priest, you'd have a senior priest over your shoulder watching everything you'd write. And you might be at page 320, and you might word wrap something in the wrong space. You might miss a consonant, and you'd have to start all over again. There was no photocopiers. That is why you're seeing copies of the Bible across hundreds of years that are perfectly preserved and identical, unlike any other book that there is. And that Bible is perfectly preserved in the original tongue. And there's something called the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, where now you can actually study the Bible deeply. You can say, in the beginning, and you can go to the original text word that the beginning is and discover, is it the beginning like beginning of time, the beginning of a race, the beginning of what? God. What kind of God is it? God created the heavens and the earth, let's say. Or is it heaven and earth? And you can get to the original language. What is it? God with a capital G, a small g? Where else was God mentioned in the Bible in this context? You can get a deep understanding. So yes, you don't have to trust a translation when you can get to the original language. When you look at an interlinear Bible with an exhaustive concordance, your understanding can be through the roof. Let alone we have the ability to learn the original language still to this day. There are many scholars that do. I have great respect for some of them that I've learned a lot from. And then there's the New Testament. People say, well, the New Testament is hogwash because Christ died and nothing was written down for 30 years. Well, you see how strong the written history was in Judaism. The oral history was also just as strong. In fact, there's proof that within 6 months after his death, there were things. Jesus spoke in parables, for example, and parables are stories. Stories, and neuroscience has discovered that stories are the best way that we can handle a lot of information and keep it forever. In the same way, if you really want to learn something, you learn it in a song. You learn it in a poem. If I said, Hickory Dickory blank, the mouse did what? How did you know it was Hickory Dickory Dock? The mouse jumped over the clock. Was it written? If it was never written in a book, does that mean it never existed? No, it's part of our culture. It's part of the English language. Twinkle, twinkle, little petunia. Like, come on. So within months after Jesus' death, these languages were now perpetuating themselves, and they're just as dead on as Hickory Dickory and Dock. Yes, it took a number of years before it was printed out when people are like, okay, everyone's dying, let's get this thing punched out. But when it comes down to it, the first echoing was right from the very first times after his death. And that's why the Apostle Paul even said, look, as I've said to you guys before, this is what we're going through. This is what you need to work on. I've been there. We've been through this together. It wasn't, oh, here's some new information that I've written down for you. You must follow now because I just came out of it out of the thin air in my mind. No, even what you see in the New Testament was the fulfillment of many conversations that he's had. And if you take a look at the original language in its original structure, it runs very much like a limerick. And to my understanding, if you look at the language in its original structure, not translated to English, French, Spanish, or whatever, it flows differently and actually sticks in your brain differently.